Have you ever wondered about why some people apologize differently from others? Or have you ever wondered about why you apologize the way that you do? My name is Alfred Jones, and today I'll be sharing the journal article that I read, how the journal article that I read can help explain a recent experience that I shared with my roommate David. First, I'll talk about the research and briefly explain how it relates to my situation. Then I'll explain how it links to the material from the textbook. And finally, I'll go deeper into my situation with David and explain how this research applies to what I've learned. Now that I've covered the general idea of what I'll be talking about, I'd like to begin on my first point, which is the research. In this study, researchers aim to examine forgiveness granting in friendships and dating relationships. In order to examine this, researchers used Kelly's 3 forms of forgiveness granting, which are direct, indirect, and conditional. The results of this study show a few different things. The main one relative to my friendship is that indirect forgiveness was found to be the most commonly used form of forgiveness granting among close friends. As well as this, it was found that communicating forgiveness is affected by a relationship type, transgression severity, transgressor blameworthiness, and ongoing negative effect. Now that I briefly explained what the research is about, I'd like to relate this back to the course material from the textbook. The first concept I'd like to relate this article to comes from chapter 3 about language and relationships. And it's about high context versus low context cultures. High context cultures acquire most communication information from nonverbal cues, and low context cultures derive information from the explicitly stated and literal meaning of language. The second concept I'd like to relate this article is from chapter 9 on managing interpersonal conflict. And this concept is the pseudo-conflict, which is conflict triggered by miscommunication. The first concept of cultural context relates to the article because of the different ways that people communicate forgiveness. Somebody from a high context culture might prefer to employ indirect forgiveness, whereas someone from a low context culture would likely prefer direct forgiveness. I believe that my roommate, coming from a low context culture, would likely prefer direct forgiveness. The second concept I explained relates to the article because pseudo-conflicts and conflicts in general oftentimes are followed by an apology, and the article explains in the different ways we go about apologizing to people. Now that I've mentioned how this article relates to the textbook, I'd like to apply it to a recent situation between my roommate and I. From my own experience, I found that the article's results were quite accurate, particularly in situations where the transgression wasn't that harmful. For example, when my roommate and I split groceries, we expect to split each item. Last week I ate the entire thing of ice cream. As the article states, findings suggest direct forgiveness may be relegated for use following less severe and blameworthy transgressions. This was accurate because my roommate was able to forgive me directly and told me that I should just buy him the next one, which I agreed to. As well as this, researchers Waldron and Kelly found that indirect forgiveness is frequently enacted following severe and blameworthy transgressions. I found this to be true in my personal life as recently as last month, when I had to tell my roommate that I lost his keys that he let me borrow. While David was extremely frustrated, he let me know that he forgave me by not treating me any different or demonstrating any ongoing negative effects. From what I've learned in this article, there are different forms of granting forgiveness that I can use in different situations. I believe that in order to improve upon my relationships, I should be able to recognize and utilize the different forgiveness granting techniques. For example, I should be able to pick up on the nonverbal cues that my roommate may be utilizing in order to demonstrate indirect forgiveness. As well as this, I should be able to recognize when a person might prefer indirect over conditional forgiveness. In conclusion, I'd like to summarize my findings. Today I talked about the journal article that I researched titled Communicating Forgiveness in Friendships and Dating Relationships, and related it to a friendship of my own. First by explaining the data found in the journal, then linking it to the course material, and finally by relating it all back to my friendship that I have with my roommate David. Thank you.